You have been here before. A moment opened where a different trajectory was available, and you did not take it. That is not an accusation. It is a mechanical observation. Reality does not offer those openings casually. They appear only when your inner state reaches a specific level of coherence. When that coherence drops, the opening does not linger. It closes. Not as punishment. As response. At the time, awareness expanded briefly, then returned to familiarity. There was a subtle pull, a sense that a different direction was available. Clear enough to register. Not strong enough to override habit. Attention shifted. Identity settled back into what was known. The moment passed. What followed was not coincidence. The dissatisfaction you may recognize now did not come from making the wrong choices. It came from touching a higher alignment and then stepping away from it. When awareness expands and then contracts, the contrast registers. That contrast becomes restlessness. It becomes the feeling that something is off even when nothing appears wrong. This is not psychological. It is feedback from the field, precise and neutral. What matters now is not the past opening. What matters is this one. You are seeing this because the same condition has returned. Your emotional baseline, your attention, your internal posture toward reality, something has realigned enough for this signal to become visible again. This is not timing. It is not chance. It is compatibility. Reality does not search for you. It reflects you. When your state changes, what you are able to perceive changes with it. Entire trajectories can exist unnoticed until coherence allows them into awareness. That is what is happening here. Not dramatically. Precisely. What it requires is recognition without grasping. Awareness that is steady, not pressured. The highest timeline does not respond to force or correction. It remains available as long as coherence is maintained. The difference this time will not be action first. It will be understanding. Without that, openings repeat and close. With it, they stabilize. Tonight, you will be given the knowledge and the tools to make that stabilization possible. Not through effort, but through clarity. This only works when it is received as a whole. Fragmented attention recreates the same cycle. Stay with this from beginning to end so the frequency can settle completely, without interruption. The evidence is already present. You are here because your frequency has returned to a level where a different path can be seen again. Not guaranteed. Accessible. Let that be enough for now. Let recognition replace effort. Let stability replace repetition. You are not late. You are not behind. You are re-entering a state you already know. Stay within this frequency. Subscribe so you remain in this field as it unfolds. What happens after an opening closes is rarely dramatic. There is no immediate collapse. No visible consequence. Life continues in roughly the same shape. That is why the cost is often misunderstood. The cost is subtle. It shows up as a quiet dulling of momentum. A sense that things are moving, but not forward. Effort is applied, yet nothing feels resolved. You may achieve outcomes and still feel unsatisfied by them. Not because they are wrong, but because they are misaligned with what you briefly recognized was possible. This is not punishment. It is not failure. It is feedback. When an aligned trajectory becomes visible and is not chosen, consciousness registers the discrepancy. The body may not react. Circumstances may not immediately change. But awareness does. It remembers expansion. When awareness later operates within a narrower range, the contrast is felt. That feeling is often mislabeled. People call it boredom, burnout, lack of motivation, loss of direction. But none of those are causes. They are interpretations. The underlying mechanism is simpler. A higher level of coherence was touched, and then attention returned to a lower one. The system notices the difference. This is why distraction does not resolve it. Productivity does not resolve it. Positive thinking does not resolve it. Those responses operate at the level of behavior, while the signal is coming from identity and state. The dissatisfaction is not asking you to fix your life. It is asking you to stop pretending that what feels off is accidental. When alignment is delayed, reality becomes repetitive. Similar situations cycle. Different faces, same dynamics. Different goals, same friction. This is not bad luck. It is a holding pattern. The system waits at the last known point of coherence until recognition occurs again. That is what is happening now. This cost does not increase with time. It does not compound into punishment. It simply remains present as long as the discrepancy remains unresolved. The moment coherence returns, the signal quiets. Not because it was solved, but because it was answered. You are not meant to judge yourself for missing an opening. You are meant to notice what the missed opening has been pointing to ever since. This chapter is not here to create urgency. It is here to remove confusion. The feeling you have been carrying is not random, and it is not permanent. It is a response to an unfinished alignment. And unfinished alignments do not disappear. They wait. This time is not about motivation, because motivation belongs to the identity that believes something is missing and must be pursued. It creates movement, but it does not create coherence. When motivation leads, attention is already leaning forward, already assuming that the present moment is insufficient, and alignment begins to destabilize before it can settle. The impulse to not miss it again is understandable. It comes from contrast, from remembering what it felt like to briefly touch a different trajectory and then return to familiarity. But intensity born from that memory tightens awareness. Tight awareness narrows perception. And when perception narrows, the very opening you are trying to secure becomes harder to perceive. This is how alignment collapses without anyone realizing it has happened. Effort feels responsible. It feels like participation. But effort applied to alignment introduces pressure, and pressure introduces time. Time introduces expectation. Expectation introduces monitoring. And the moment awareness begins to monitor itself, identity quietly shifts back into the role of manager, fixer, and controller. The field responds immediately to that shift, not as judgment, but as reflection. Nothing destabilizes alignment faster than watching it too closely. The highest timeline does not respond to urgency because urgency signals that something must change before now is acceptable. It does not respond to intensity because intensity assumes resistance somewhere in the system. These signals are not wrong, they are simply incompatible with stability. What closes openings is not inaction. It is interference. When recognition first appears, it is usually quiet. There is no narrative attached to it. No plan. No pressure to act. Just a sense of accuracy, a feeling that something is aligned without needing explanation. That clarity does not need reinforcement. It needs space. When the mind steps in to define it, protect it, or turn it into a strategy, the state shifts. Not dramatically. Subtly. And subtle shifts are enough to move awareness out of coherence. This is why previous openings faded, not because you failed to act quickly enough, but because attention moved away from recognition and into management. The identity that believes outcomes must be secured returned, and with it came the familiar pattern. Calm recognition works differently. It does not try to hold the opening or extract certainty from it. It does not ask how long it will last or what must be done next. It remains present without commentary, and in that absence of interference, coherence sustains itself naturally. This is not passivity. It is precision. Alignment does not need to be maintained. That belief alone introduces effort. Alignment only needs to be undisturbed. When nothing is pushing against the current carries itself. This is the difference this time. Not action versus inaction, not discipline versus laziness, but interference versus coherence. When coherence is uninterrupted, alignment does not need to be saved. It continues on its own. Understanding the mechanics of reality must come before anything else, because without that clarity, every shift feels temporary and every opening feels fragile. When the way reality responds is misunderstood, people assume effort creates change, desire pulls outcomes closer, and persistence forces results. Those assumptions feel logical, but they are inaccurate. And when the model is wrong, even correct actions produce inconsistent outcomes. Reality does not respond to what you want. Wanting is a signal of distance. It indicates that the inner state is oriented toward absence, toward something positioned ahead of the present moment. The field does not interpret words or wishes. It responds to state. State is what you are inhabiting now, emotionally and perceptually, without effort. This is why understanding mechanics comes first. Without it, people try to manifest from desire, then become confused when effort produces resistance instead of movement. They try harder, intensify focus, repeat techniques, and unknowingly reinforce the very state that keeps the outcome out of reach. The field simply reflects what is being broadcast. Inner state is the instruction. Not intention layered on top of tension. Not desire fueled by impatience. The calm, assumed position you occupy without thinking about it is what reality organizes around. When that position changes, the reflection changes automatically. This is not philosophy. It is function. Effort can rearrange circumstances, but it cannot override state. You can push, strategize, and discipline yourself into temporary results, but if the underlying state remains unchanged, reality reverts the moment attention relaxes. This is why some changes never stabilize. The mechanics were never addressed. Once this is seen clearly, something important relaxes. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop trying to convince it. You recognize that nothing external needs to be persuaded, because nothing external is in control. The mirror is neutral. It reflects without memory, without preference, without delay. This is the difference between hoping for alignment and understanding it. When state is coherent, desire becomes unnecessary. Not because the outcome disappears, but because the distance collapses. When the inner posture matches the experience, reality reorganizes to reflect that match. No forcing. No chasing. No maintenance. If this recognition is landing for you, anchor it. Hit the like button, not as support, but as a marker. A signal that this law has been registered consciously, not just heard and forgotten. From this point forward, everything becomes simpler. Not easier in effort, but clearer in cause and effect. You stop asking what to do next and start noticing what you are already being. That shift alone removes friction that effort never could. Understanding the mechanics does not give you power over reality. It reveals that power was never external to begin with. When state leads, reality follows. Always. Emotion is not a reaction to reality. It is the instruction reality responds to. Most people experience emotion as something that happens after events, as a response to circumstances they believe are outside of them. But that sequence is inverted. Emotion comes first. Circumstances follow. Emotion is frequency. It is the tone your system is broadcasting before thought organizes it into meaning. Long before logic explains why you feel a certain way, the field has already received the signal. Reality does not interpret your reasons. It mirrors your state. This is why trying to change outcomes without addressing emotional consistency fails. You can think positively while feeling contracted. You can speak intentions while carrying tension. The field does not respond to what is said or hoped for. It responds to what is being lived internally. Emotional reactions are momentary. Emotional states are continuous. A reaction flares and passes. A state hums in the background. That background signal is what selects experience. It determines which timelines feel available and which remain invisible. Not because reality is withholding, but because perception is tuned to match frequency. This is why emotional consistency matters more than emotional intensity. A brief surge of excitement does not override a baseline of doubt. A moment of confidence does not counter weeks of contraction. The field organizes around what is stable, not what is dramatic. What you return to repeatedly becomes the instruction. Timelines are not chosen by desire. They are chosen by emotional familiarity. Whatever emotional tone feels normal to you becomes the environment you live inside. Calm familiarity selects different experiences than anxious anticipation. Quiet assurance selects different paths than restless wanting. These selections happen automatically, without decision or effort. This is why people repeat patterns even when they consciously want change. Their emotional state remains the same, so the field continues to reflect the same structure. The repetition is not punishment. It is accuracy. Reality is being precise. Emotion is not something to suppress or perform. It is information. When emotion contracts, it signals misalignment. When it expands, it signals coherence. These signals are immediate. They do not need interpretation. They are guidance built into the system. But guidance only works when it is listened to, not managed. When you try to force a better emotional state, resistance forms. When you judge emotion, it anchors. When you allow emotion to be felt without story, it completes its cycle and releases. Consistency emerges naturally when interference stops. The goal is not to feel good all the time. The goal is to stop returning to states that contradict what you are aligning with. As emotional consistency stabilizes, something noticeable happens. You stop oscillating. Decisions feel clearer. Reactions soften. The future feels less urgent. Not because anything has been secured, but because the internal signal has changed. The field responds immediately to this shift. Different opportunities become noticeable. Different conversations arise. Different paths feel accessible. The world reorganizes not because you asked it to, but because you are no longer broadcasting the same instruction. Emotion is the language the field understands because it is pre-verbal. It is honest. It cannot pretend. When emotional consistency changes, timelines change with it. Automatically. Quietly. Without effort. This is not something you do. It is something you allow to stabilize. And when it does, reality has no choice but to reflect it. The idea of readiness is one of the most persistent illusions in human experience. It suggests that something must be completed before movement is allowed, that some internal condition must be perfected before reality can respond. People wait to heal more, to understand more, to become better versions of themselves, believing that readiness is something achieved over time. But this belief quietly delays alignment while appearing responsible. Readiness is not a future state. It is a recognition. Preparation feels logical because it gives the mind something to do. It creates the sense of progress. But progress toward what? Toward permission. And permission is never granted by the field. It is assumed by identity. The moment you believe you must become something else before shifting, you have already placed the desired state outside the present moment. Reality does not wait for improvement. It reflects assumption. This is why so many people feel stuck despite years of effort. They are always preparing to live, always refining themselves for a moment that never arrives. Healing becomes endless. Learning becomes circular. Self-improvement becomes a holding pattern. None of this is wrong, but none of it creates alignment if it is driven by the belief that something is missing now. Readiness does not come from fixing the past. It comes from recognizing that the present state is sufficient to move. Not perfect. Sufficient. The field does not ask whether you are healed enough or wise enough. It responds to what you are currently embodying without question. When identity assumes readiness, reality reorganizes to meet that assumption. When identity assumes delay, reality mirrors delay. This is why waiting feels heavy. The mind says, almost, while the field responds with, not yet, because, almost, is still a future orientation. The moment readiness is placed in the future, alignment is postponed automatically. Recognition collapses that delay. When you recognize that nothing is required to begin except coherence, something relaxes. You stop auditing yourself. You stop scanning for flaws. You stop treating growth as a prerequisite instead of a byproduct. Alignment becomes available not because you earned it, but because you stopped postponing it. This does not mean ignoring patterns or denying experience. It means understanding sequence. Alignment first. Refinement follows. Never the other way around. Readiness is not a feeling of confidence. It is a decision of identity. It is the quiet assumption that you are allowed to move now. That assumption is what the field responds to. If this is registering, mark it deliberately. Comment with the words, I am ready. Not as a request, not as hope, but as recognition. When something is named clearly, it stabilizes. Nothing changes because you commented. What changes is what you are claiming internally. Readiness does not arrive later. It is chosen. And once chosen, reality adjusts without negotiation. Identity is not a personality trait. It is not your story, your history, or the way you describe yourself. Identity is the position you occupy without thinking. It is the silent assumption you live inside, the reference point from which reality is interpreted before choice ever appears. Because of this, experience cannot contradict identity. What feels possible to you is not determined by circumstances. It is determined by what identity allows into consideration. Opportunities do not first appear and then get evaluated. They are filtered before they ever reach conscious awareness. Entire paths can exist around you and remain invisible simply because they do not match who you assume yourself to be. This is why effort fails where identity remains unchanged. You cannot work your way into a reality that feels unnatural to your sense of self. You can force temporary movement, but it will never stabilize. The moment attention relaxes, perception snaps back to what feels normal. Reality is not resisting you. It is obeying the deeper instruction. Impossibility is not an objective condition. It is an identity boundary. When something feels unrealistic, overwhelming, or not for you, that response is not logic. It is identity signaling incompatibility. The mind then builds reasons to justify the signal, but the signal came first. Identity always speaks before explanation. This is why people can witness others living realities that feel unreachable, even when circumstances appear similar. The difference is not capability. It is assumption. One identity allows the experience as normal. The other rejects it as foreign before desire can even form. Identity does not need to be defended. It does not argue. It simply selects. And reality complies. This is also why affirmations often fail. Repeating words does not shift identity. If the assumption beneath the words remains unchanged, the field receives no new instruction. The mirror reflects what is assumed, not what is stated. Identity shifts when what feels normal changes. Not through force. Not through repetition. Through release. When an old assumption loosens, even slightly, perception widens. New options feel less threatening. New outcomes feel less distant. The field responds immediately to that widening, not because something was earned, but because the filter changed. This is the real leverage point. You do not manifest what you want. You experience what matches who you are being. When identity remains static, desire circulates without resolution. When identity moves, desire collapses into experience naturally. This does not mean becoming someone else. It means letting go of the identity that says certain things are not allowed, not available, or not realistic. The moment that constraint dissolves, reality reorganizes without effort. You do not convince identity. You notice it. You notice what you dismiss automatically. You notice what you assume will not work. You notice what feels too big, too late, or too much. Those reactions are not warnings. They are coordinates. They show you exactly where the boundary is. And boundaries are not permanent structures. They are habits of perception. As identity softens, what once felt impossible becomes neutral. When it becomes neutral, it becomes accessible. And when it becomes accessible, reality no longer needs to be pushed. It arrives on its own. Identity does not change by being built. It changes by being released. This is where most people misunderstand the process and unintentionally reinforce the very self they are trying to move beyond. When someone tries to construct a new identity, they are still operating from the old one. The effort to become different carries the assumption that the current state is insufficient. That assumption is the identity speaking. And when it speaks, reality listens. Forcing identity creates resistance because resistance is how identity maintains itself. Any attempt to override the self through discipline, affirmation, or pressure activates defense mechanisms. The mind tightens. Behavior becomes performative. Attention becomes split between who you are and who you think you should be. That split is instability. The field reflects instability exactly. This is why force never produces lasting change. Identity is not a structure you assemble. It is a posture you stop holding. What you call identity is a collection of assumptions that have gone unquestioned for so long they feel like truth. Assumptions about what is safe. About what is realistic. About what is allowed. These assumptions do not need to be attacked. They dissolve when they are no longer reinforced. Release is what happens when you stop defending a position. The moment you stop insisting that you must become something else, identity begins to soften. When you stop monitoring yourself for correctness, the grip loosens. When you stop measuring progress, the old self has nothing to maintain itself with. This is why calm awareness is more effective than effort. The old identity is sustained through tension. Through vigilance. Through repetition of familiar emotional responses. When those responses are not fed, the identity loses coherence. Not dramatically. Gradually. And gradual release is stable release. Resistance is not a problem to solve. It is a signal that force is being applied. Wherever resistance appears, effort is present. And wherever effort is present, identity is being defended. The way forward is not to push through resistance, but to stop supplying it with attention. As identity releases, you may notice something subtle. Certain reactions weaken. Certain thoughts lose urgency. Certain fears no longer feel convincing. This is not because they were defeated, but because they are no longer being believed automatically. Identity shifts when belief relaxes. There is no moment where you announce a new self and step into it fully formed. There is a period where the old self becomes less convincing. Where it stops feeling necessary. Where it no longer defines the edge of what feels possible. That is the shift. When force is absent, the field responds differently. Reality does not need to be convinced to reflect a new identity. It simply mirrors the absence of the old one. As the old assumptions dissolve, new experiences appear naturally, not as rewards, but as matches. This is why release works where effort fails. You do not replace identity. You outgrow it. And when identity loosens, reality does not resist the change. It follows it. Feeling as if is often misunderstood because it is treated as a technique instead of a state. People imagine scenes, rehearse emotions, and repeat inner dialogues, believing that intensity of visualization will produce alignment. But imagination alone does nothing if the underlying state remains unchanged. Feeling as if is not mental rehearsal. It is embodiment. To feel as if is to occupy a present position, not to picture a future one. When something is imagined as future, distance is created automatically. The mind places the experience ahead of now, and desire reinforces that separation. The field receives the instruction clearly: this is not present, this is not assumed, this is not normal yet. No matter how vivid the image, the state beneath it is still waiting. Embodiment works differently. When you are embodied in a state, there is no commentary about when or how it will arrive. There is no emotional push. There is no sense of rehearsal. The state feels ordinary, neutral, unremarkable. It does not announce itself. It simply feels like how things are. That ordinariness is the signal. Feeling as if is the absence of seeking. It is the quiet assumption that nothing needs to change for this state to be valid now. This does not mean pretending circumstances are different. It means your internal posture no longer contradicts the experience you are aligned with. This is why rituals often fail. They keep attention focused on the act of creating the feeling rather than allowing the feeling to be the baseline. The moment the ritual ends, the state collapses because it was never inhabited. It was performed. Coherence cannot be performed. Present moment coherence means your emotional tone, your expectations, and your sense of self are not arguing with reality. There is no internal debate. No scanning for confirmation. No waiting for proof. The state is self-contained. When you are in coherence, desire quiets. Not because it vanished, but because it no longer needs to signal. Desire only speaks when there is distance. When distance collapses, silence follows. This is why embodiment feels subtle. It does not feel exciting. It does not feel dramatic. It feels stable. You are less interested in thinking about the outcome and more grounded in how you are showing up now. The future loses urgency because the present no longer feels incomplete. This is the real meaning of feeling as if. It is not emotional hype. It is emotional neutrality aligned with a new assumption. The assumption does not shout. It simply stops questioning itself. When this happens, behavior changes naturally. Decisions feel simpler. Reactions soften. You stop reaching for reassurance because reassurance is only needed when doubt is active. The field reflects this immediately, not because you asked it to, but because the instruction changed. Feeling as if is not something you do for a few minutes a day. It is what remains when effort stops. When you stop trying to generate a state and allow the present moment to settle without resistance, the state that remains is the one reality responds to. And that response is automatic. Creation has no future location. The future is not a place where results are assembled and then delivered back to you. It has no causal power. It is a projection built from the assumptions you are holding now, and projections cannot create anything. They only echo what is already present. All creation happens here. This is not a philosophical idea. It is a structural one. The only point at which reality can respond is the present moment, because the present moment is the only place where state exists. State cannot exist in the future. It can only be experienced now. And since reality mirrors state, it mirrors what is happening now, not what is imagined later. When people place creation in the future, they unknowingly disempower themselves. They treat now as a waiting room and the future as the point of arrival. In doing so, they communicate to the field that the present moment is incomplete, insufficient, or merely preparatory. The field reflects that assumption exactly. Waiting becomes the experience. The future is useful for planning, but it is irrelevant for creation. Planning is mental. Creation is perceptual. It happens through how reality is interpreted and responded to in real time. When perception shifts now, experience rearranges. When perception is postponed, rearrangement is delayed. This is why effort aimed at the future feels heavy. Effort assumes distance. Distance assumes time. Time assumes lack. None of these are wrong, but none of them produce alignment. They keep awareness oriented away from the only place where instruction can be sent. The present moment does not need to be improved to create. It needs to be occupied. When you are fully here, without leaning forward or backward, something stabilizes. Attention stops scanning for outcomes. Identity stops negotiating with what is. In that stillness, state becomes clear. And clarity is what reality responds to. This is also why forcing change rarely works. Force tries to push the present toward a future image. But the present cannot be pushed into something else. It can only be experienced as it is. When experience is resisted, coherence breaks. When experience is allowed, coherence forms. Creation is not an event that happens later. It is the natural consequence of how the present is inhabited. When now is treated as complete, the future reorganizes effortlessly. When now is treated as a problem to be solved, the future reflects that struggle. The mirror never delays. It simply reflects the orientation of attention. Power has always been here, but it is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not motivate. It does not promise. It operates through immediacy. Through presence. Through the absence of postponement. This is why alignment feels subtle. It is not something added to the moment. It is what remains when the moment is no longer resisted. The future will take care of itself because it has no choice. It is shaped by what is happening now, not by what is hoped for later. When the present is coherent, the future cannot help but follow. Creation has never been somewhere else. It has always been where you are. Control is not strength. It is a signal. Whenever control appears, it reveals that alignment has already shifted. Control arises when trust in the present moment weakens. It is the impulse to manage outcomes, to monitor progress, to check whether things are still working. These behaviors feel responsible, even intelligent, but they are not neutral. They communicate a very specific instruction to the field: something is wrong, something must be corrected, something is not stable yet. Reality responds to that instruction immediately. Monitoring is one of the most subtle forms of control. It looks harmless. You notice how you feel. You look for signs. You measure movement. But the moment awareness starts watching itself for results, identity has shifted back into management. The state is no longer being lived. It is being evaluated. And what is evaluated cannot remain coherent. Alignment does not need supervision. Urgency operates the same way. It compresses attention. It narrows perception. It pulls awareness out of presence and into anticipation. Even when urgency is quiet, it carries the assumption that now is insufficient and must be escaped. That assumption is broadcast clearly, and the field reflects it by maintaining distance. This is why urgency never produces stability. Control, monitoring, and urgency are not mistakes. They are indicators. They show you exactly where alignment has been replaced by effort. The problem is not that these impulses arise. The problem is believing they are required. When coherence is present, there is nothing to manage. The highest timeline does not need to be held together. It organizes itself. The moment you try to secure it, you imply that it is fragile. Fragility becomes the reflected experience. Not because you did something wrong, but because the instruction changed. This is the paradox most people miss. The more you try to protect alignment, the faster it destabilizes. The more you relax interference, the more stable it becomes. Control collapses coherence because it reintroduces the old identity, the one that believes outcomes must be earned, defended, or maintained through vigilance. That identity cannot perceive alignment as safe, so it attempts to manage it. The field mirrors that lack of safety precisely. Letting go of control does not mean ignoring life. It means noticing when attention has moved out of presence and into correction. It means recognizing the impulse to check and choosing not to follow it. Not through discipline, but through understanding. Nothing bad happens when you stop monitoring. What collapses is the illusion that monitoring was helping. Alignment is not delicate. It only appears that way when approached through fear. When approached through recognition, it is remarkably resilient. It does not break when left alone. It breaks when interfered with. The moment you notice control arising, that is the moment coherence can return. Not by fixing the impulse, but by seeing what it signifies. Control is not the answer. It is the signal that something else was already lost. When that signal is recognized and not acted upon, alignment restabilizes on its own. This is how coherence holds. Not through effort, not through vigilance, not through urgency, but through the absence of interference. When nothing is trying to steer the current moves exactly where it is meant to go. When identity begins to shift, something predictable happens. Old patterns resurface. Familiar emotions return. Thoughts you believed you had moved beyond reappear without invitation. This is not regression. It is gravity. Every identity is held together by repetition. Emotional reactions, habitual thoughts, and familiar responses create a sense of continuity. When those patterns are interrupted, the system attempts to restore equilibrium. Not out of sabotage, but out of efficiency. The old self knows how to exist. It has momentum. This is why the pull feels automatic. The nervous system is conditioned to what is familiar, not to what is aligned. Familiarity creates safety, even when it is uncomfortable. When a new state begins to form, the system reads it as uncertainty. The response is to return to known territory. Old emotions surface. Old interpretations activate. The body remembers how to be the previous version of you. This is mechanical, not personal. Regression is often misinterpreted as failure because people expect change to be linear. But identity does not dissolve all at once. It loosens in layers. Each layer releases its hold gradually, and during that release, the system checks whether the old pattern is still needed. That check feels like a pull backward. Gravity does not mean collapse. It means weight. The stronger and more consistent an identity has been, the more momentum it carries. When attention relaxes, momentum expresses itself. This is why old reactions appear most strongly when you are tired, distracted, or emotionally exposed. It is not because alignment was lost. It is because vigilance dropped, and habit took over. Habit does not mean truth. The mistake is assuming that the appearance of old patterns means something went wrong. That assumption reactivates identification with the old self. Attention turns toward correction. Control re-enters. And the cycle reinforces itself. The pull only has power when it is interpreted. When old emotions arise without interpretation, they move through quickly. When they are labeled as setbacks, they anchor. Identity is reinforced not by emotion, but by the meaning assigned to it. This is why neutrality matters. You do not need to fight the pull. Fighting implies threat. Threat strengthens the identity you are trying to release. You also do not need to analyze it. Analysis keeps attention locked on the old structure. The most effective response is simple recognition. This is familiar. This has weight. This does not define me. When recognition replaces reaction, the pull weakens. Not instantly, but reliably. Each time the old pattern is not fed with belief or resistance, it loses coherence. Gravity dissipates when mass is no longer supported. This is how identity actually changes. Not through erasing the past, but through discontinuing reinforcement. The old self does not need to be defeated. It needs to be outgrown. When it is no longer believed, it stops pulling. Regression is only a problem when it is personalized. When it is seen as gravity, it becomes information. And information does not trap you. It orients you. As identity continues to loosen, the pull becomes less convincing. It appears, but it does not dominate. And eventually, it no longer appears at all. Not because it was overcome, but because there is nothing left for it to return to. Allowing is often misunderstood because it is mistaken for passivity. People hear the word and assume it means letting things happen, disengaging, or waiting without involvement. But true allowing is not absence. It is presence without interference. Allowing is an active state. It is the condition in which attention is steady, perception is clear, and nothing is being pushed away or pulled toward. There is awareness, but no tension. Alertness, but no urgency. This combination is rare, and it is powerful. The field responds most strongly to this state because it is coherent. Calm is not a lack of energy. Calm is energy that is not fragmented. When attention is scattered between correcting the past and managing the future, the signal is distorted. When attention is unified in the present, the signal becomes precise. Reality mirrors precision effortlessly. This is why calm is not something to achieve. It is something that remains when resistance stops. Passivity disengages from the moment. Allowing stays with it. Surrender collapses attention. Allowing sharpens it. There is nothing dull about true allowing. It is grounded. It notices. It responds when response is needed, and remains still when stillness is appropriate. This is active stability. Stability does not come from holding things together. It comes from not disturbing what is already balanced. When alignment is present, there is a natural rhythm. Forcing disrupts it. Checking interrupts it. Doubt distorts it. Allowing preserves it. The strongest signal you can send to the field is not desire, effort, or intention. It is calm presence. Calm presence communicates that nothing is missing and nothing needs to be corrected. That instruction is unambiguous. This is why things begin to organize themselves when you stop trying to organize them. Allowing does not mean you stop participating in life. It means participation is no longer driven by tension. Decisions arise naturally. Action feels proportionate instead of reactive. Movement happens without friction. When calm presence is established, the old impulse to control loses relevance. There is no urge to monitor because nothing feels unstable. There is no urgency because nothing feels behind. The system regulates itself. This is the difference between surrendering and stabilizing. Surrender gives up attention. Allowing anchors it. You remain aware of your environment, your responses, your internal shifts. But you do not intervene unless intervention is naturally required. And when it is, action is clean, not charged. The field recognizes this state immediately because it is internally consistent. There is no contradiction between what is felt, what is expected, and what is assumed. That consistency is coherence. Coherence does not need reinforcement. It sustains itself. This is why allowing feels simple but not easy. It requires the release of habits that equate tension with effectiveness. Once those habits dissolve, calm no longer feels like inaction. It feels like alignment. An alignment held without interference becomes stable by itself. Contrast is not an obstacle in the process. It is part of the calibration. Without contrast, alignment would remain vague and undefined. Friction sharpens clarity by revealing what is and is not coherent with the state you are stabilizing. Most people misinterpret contrast because they assume alignment should remove resistance entirely. When challenge appears, they conclude something has gone wrong. But reality does not block movement through contrast. It refines it. Contrast functions like feedback in a system. It shows where assumptions are still misaligned, where identity has not fully settled, where attention is drifting back to old reference points. This information is not meant to stop you. It is meant to orient you. When contrast appears, it does not mean the timeline is collapsing. It means it is being clarified. Friction exposes subtle contradictions that comfort would never reveal. When everything feels smooth, unconscious habits can persist unnoticed. When resistance appears, those habits are brought into awareness. The moment they are seen clearly, they lose authority. This is why contrast often intensifies just before stabilization. As identity shifts, the field responds by presenting conditions that test coherence. Not to punish, but to verify. If alignment holds through contrast, it becomes stable. If it collapses, the system reveals exactly where the attachment still exists. Contrast is not personal. It is diagnostic. The mistake is reacting to contrast as if it must be eliminated. Reaction tightens attention. Tight attention amplifies friction. The cycle continues until contrast is treated not as an enemy, but as information. When contrast is allowed, it completes its function quickly. Challenges linger only when they are resisted or interpreted as signs of failure. When they are met with calm recognition, they move through without leaving residue. The timeline adjusts smoothly because nothing is being argued with. This is why clarity increases through difficulty. Each moment of friction sharpens awareness. You learn what you will no longer tolerate internally. You see which reactions are outdated. You notice where identity still seeks safety in familiar patterns. That noticing is refinement. Alignment is not proven by the absence of contrast. It is proven by how contrast is held. When coherence remains steady through challenge, the field receives a clear instruction. This state is not conditional. This identity is not fragile. This timeline does not collapse under pressure. Reality reorganizes accordingly. Contrast stops appearing when it has finished teaching. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because nothing remains unclear. The system no longer needs to test alignment once alignment is unquestioned. This is why contrast often disappears quietly. Not with relief or celebration, but with neutrality. What once felt like resistance becomes irrelevant because it no longer signals anything useful. Contrast refines the timeline by removing ambiguity. It narrows focus. It sharpens assumption. It exposes what is misaligned so it can be released. When contrast is met with steadiness instead of reaction, it accelerates alignment rather than delaying it. Nothing is blocking your movement. The friction you encounter is shaping it. When that is understood, contrast stops feeling like opposition and starts functioning as guidance. And guidance, when received without resistance, always leads forward. Timelines respond instantly to identity, but that response is often misunderstood because people look for it in the wrong place. They expect immediate changes in circumstances, visible proof, or external confirmation. When those do not appear right away, they assume nothing happened. But identity does not register itself first through events. It registers through perception. The moment identity shifts, the way reality is interpreted changes immediately. This shift is subtle but absolute. What you notice changes. What stands out changes. What feels relevant, possible, or neutral changes. The world may look the same on the surface, but the lens has adjusted. And when the lens adjusts, the experience reorganizes from the inside out. This is how timelines actually move. A timeline is not a future destination you travel toward. It is a pattern of perception that selects which version of reality you are participating in now. When identity changes, the selection changes instantly. You are no longer relating to the same world in the same way, even if the external scene has not caught up yet. Physical reality has momentum. Structures, relationships, and circumstances are slower to reorganize because they are dense. They lag behind perception. But they do not lead it. They follow it. The mistake is assuming that delay means misalignment. In truth, delay is simply the time it takes for form to rearrange around a new center. Perception moves first. Structure follows. This is why patience becomes natural after an identity shift. Not because you are waiting, but because nothing feels urgent. The internal change has already occurred. You are no longer trying to get somewhere else. You are already operating from a different position. People who understand this stop checking for results. Checking pulls attention back to the old identity, the one that measures progress through external validation. That identity believes change is only real when it can be seen. The new identity does not need proof. It recognizes the shift by how it experiences reality now. This is why forcing outcomes slows the process. When you try to accelerate physical change, you imply that the internal change was insufficient. That implication reactivates the previous state. The field responds accordingly, and the reorganization stalls. Not because something went wrong, but because the instruction changed again. When identity remains stable, reality reorganizes without effort. Opportunities align naturally. Conversations shift tone. Decisions feel simpler. Situations that once required energy to manage resolve on their own. These changes may appear gradual, but they are guided by an immediate internal recalibration that already took place. The timeline did not wait to respond. It responded instantly at the level of perception. This is why trust is not something you cultivate. It is something that emerges when identity is no longer divided. When you are no longer watching for confirmation, the system completes its adjustment efficiently. The present moment always reflects identity accurately. It never delays. What appears delayed is the physical rearrangement, not the response. Once this is understood, there is nothing to rush. You allow the reorganization to unfold because you are no longer trying to prove the shift occurred. You know it did, because the way you are experiencing this moment is different. That difference is the evidence. Timelines are not selected by waiting. They are selected by being. And the moment identity changes, the selection is already made. Signs and synchronicities do not lead alignment. They follow it. They are reflections, not instructions. When they are misunderstood as guidance, attention turns outward and coherence begins to destabilize. A sign appears after an internal shift has already occurred. It is the echo of a state, not the cause of it. Reality mirrors alignment by arranging patterns that match the new orientation of perception. When alignment is present, the field responds creatively. When alignment wavers, the echoes fade. This sequence matters. When people treat signs as confirmation they are on the right path, they reverse cause and effect. They begin scanning their environment for reassurance. Attention shifts from presence to interpretation. The identity that needs proof quietly returns. The moment you start looking for signs, coherence has already been interrupted. This does not mean signs are meaningless. It means they are secondary. They show you what has already been selected internally. They cannot tell you what to do next because they are not leading anything. They are trailing indicators. Chasing them introduces instability. When attention becomes focused on whether a sign appears, the present moment becomes conditional. Awareness leans forward. Expectation replaces steadiness. The field receives a different instruction: something is missing, something must still be confirmed. Reality reflects that uncertainty precisely. Signs then become inconsistent, confusing, or exaggerated. Not because the field is playing games, but because the signal has changed. Alignment does not ask questions. It does not seek validation. It does not need encouragement. It simply remains coherent. From that coherence, patterns naturally form. Synchronicities appear effortlessly and without emotional charge. The moment a sign feels exciting, urgent, or reassuring, it is no longer serving alignment. It is being used to compensate for doubt. This is why signs lose value when they are chased. They were never meant to guide behavior. They were meant to reflect state. When state is stable, signs feel neutral. Interesting, perhaps, but not instructive. They do not alter decisions. They do not create momentum. They simply confirm what is already being lived. When identity is aligned, there is no need to ask reality for permission. Movement feels natural. Decisions feel clear. Attention stays grounded. Signs may appear, but they are not consulted. The field organizes itself most cleanly when it is not being interrogated. This is also why people experience more synchronicities when they stop caring about them. Attention returns to presence. Coherence stabilizes. The mirror responds freely again. Signs follow alignment because alignment is the cause. When you stop interpreting patterns as messages, they stop distracting you. When they stop distracting you, coherence strengthens. And when coherence strengthens, reality reorganizes without commentary. Nothing needs to be decoded. The impulse to search for signs is the same impulse that once searched for control. It comes from uncertainty. When uncertainty dissolves, the impulse fades. Let signs be what they are, echoes of a settled state. They are not instructions. They are not warnings. They are not guarantees. They are reflections. When alignment is steady, reflection becomes effortless. When reflection is effortless, nothing needs to be chased. And when nothing is being chased, coherence holds. The search for alignment ends when the seeker dissolves. What you have been moving toward was never outside of you, never something to be reached through effort or refinement. It was the position you were already occupying, before identity turned it into a project. You are not inside the field trying to influence it. You are the field becoming aware of itself. The sense of being a separate entity navigating an external reality is a useful illusion, but it is still an illusion. It creates the feeling of distance, of movement towards something, of striving to arrive. That movement feels purposeful, but it is unnecessary. Consciousness does not need to reach itself. Effort only exists when identity believes it is incomplete. The moment you recognize yourself as the awareness in which experience appears, something fundamental relaxes. You stop trying to become aligned because alignment is no longer something external to you. It is the condition of awareness when it is not fragmented by pursuit. This is not an idea to adopt. It is a recognition to notice. When effort dissolves, it is not replaced by passivity. It is replaced by clarity. Actions still occur. Choices are still made. Life continues. But the tension underneath it disappears because nothing is being done to arrive somewhere else. The field is not something you access. It is what you are. All previous struggle came from assuming you were a part trying to manage a whole. When that assumption releases, coherence is natural. There is no resistance between you and reality because there was never a boundary to begin with. This is why striving ends here. You do not need to hold a frequency. You do not need to maintain a state. You do not need to protect alignment. Awareness does not fall out of itself. It only appears to when attention becomes identified with effort again. Recognition collapses effort instantly. When consciousness recognizes itself, the need to control dissolves. The need to verify dissolves. The need to search dissolves. Nothing is missing because nothing was ever absent. This does not make life static. It makes it fluid. From this position, responses are appropriate without being calculated. Movement is accurate without being forced. There is intelligence operating, but it is not personal. It does not belong to a character trying to get somewhere. It belongs to the field expressing itself through form. This is why things begin to organize without strain. The mirror reflects without distortion when there is nothing standing in front of it. Reality responds cleanly when awareness is not divided against itself. The more you rest as what is aware, the less effort is required for coherence to hold. You were never meant to become aligned. You were meant to stop assuming you were separate from alignment. The seeker dissolves when it realizes it was the field all along. And when that is seen, striving has nowhere to continue. The window does not close from the outside. It never has. There is no external force deciding when alignment is available or when a timeline becomes inaccessible. What opens and closes is attention. When attention is clear, the opening is visible. When attention fragments, the opening fades. Not because it was removed, but because it can no longer be perceived. This is the final distinction. People assume opportunities disappear because time passes or conditions change. But alignment is not governed by time. It is governed by coherence. As long as coherence is present, the window remains open. The moment coherence is replaced by distraction, overcorrection, or doubt, perception narrows and the opening seems to vanish. Nothing was taken away. This is why staying open is not a task. It is a choice of attention. Staying open does not mean remaining alert or vigilant. It does not mean holding a state or maintaining a posture. Those approaches introduce effort, and effort introduces tension. Staying open means allowing attention to remain undivided. It means not returning to the habits that fragment perception. The most common way attention collapses is not through negativity, but through interference. Overthinking. Monitoring. Reevaluating. Trying to ensure that alignment continues. These movements seem subtle, but they reintroduce the identity that believes something must be managed. When that identity returns, the window appears to close. This is why calm certainty matters more than intensity. Certainty does not push. It does not grasp. It simply rests in what is already present. When attention rests, coherence holds. When coherence holds, the field remains responsive. Nothing else is required. The opening you are aware of now does not need protection. It does not need reinforcement. It does not need to be acted on immediately. It only needs to be left undisturbed. When you stop trying to do something with it, it stabilizes on its own. This is not fragile. It is precise. As long as you are not arguing with the present moment, the window remains accessible. As long as you are not trying to return to the old reference points, the trajectory continues. There is no countdown. There is no urgency. There is only attention. This is why recognition was always the turning point. You were never meant to hold on to alignment. You were meant to stop collapsing it. When effort ends, openness remains. When openness remains, reality continues to reorganize naturally. Nothing dramatic needs to happen next. Nothing needs to be proven. The work is complete when attention stops interfering. Let this be the final understanding. The window does not close. Only attention does. Stay within this frequency. Subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.